Hello everyone and welcome to our Python tutorial, and I do hope that you did enjoy the dictionaries and all that we discussed in the previous tutorial, and then we're going to be applying what we learned previously right after this tutorial, because this tutorial we're going to be dealing with files, and then we're going to see how we can use those data structures, especially a dictionary, to store information from a file and then get whatever information we need from a file. So basically, once you successfully store contents of a file into a data structure, the way of getting or accessing the information works the same way as previously, right? It's just that there's these bridges to how you get the file or you get the information from, right? Previously, we're just getting it, we're just filling it on our code, right, without actually using a text file or without using a file. In this case, we're going to be doing that, and your host is Telmorex, the coder. Cool. So the first question that you get to ask yourself is what is a file, right? So a file is a container for data, right? If you recall, previously when we discussed a variable is a container for storing data, right? So basically these two concepts are the same, because instead of storing data inside a variable, right, you're storing it inside what? A file. Previously, since we were just running our programs without actually storing information on any text file, we stored them inside a variable. But at times, you want to store data inside a file and then update the file. Basically, you store whatever that you want to store inside the file, and then get whatever information you want from the file, or add whatever information you want to add to that file, right? So cool. The question that comes next is how do we know what contents a file contains, right? So looking at the file name, it gives you an idea of what contents a file contains, and this is just the format of how the file is, right? So you get the file name dot, and then you will have an extension. That dot extension will be based, that would give you the extension will give you the idea as to what the file contains, right? Cool. So a file that contains text ends with .txt, right? So if you have a text, this is just, maybe you have a file with names that will be ending with .txt. So maybe you say names.txt, that's going to be the file name, right? So a file that contains a picture may end with a JPG or PNG, right? So these are pictures. These are mostly, or these are the common extensions of a picture, but then there are others as well. Then if it is a video, then it will be maybe MP4 or MKV, AVI. There's all those extensions, right? Cool. So let's discuss something else, right? Because before you actually get to a file, remember we are still in programming, which is not running away from programming. It's a file, but then we want to use this file inside our program, right? So we have to create something called a file object, and what this file object is that it makes use of a built-in function that Python has, which is a built-in which is open, right? So this is a function that opens a file, right? And then we're going to discuss in terms of the format as to how the format is, right, for this open file, because you want to be able to open any file of any data or that contains any contents, right? So this open function has a return type. We've discussed about functions, right? And then we discussed that you can either have a return or not a return. If you don't have a return in your function in Python, there's a data type that gets to be returned by default, which is a none. If it's not that, then it's going to return what, a value, right? But then what this one does, right, is not returning any of the data types, but it returns an object, and we're going to be explaining objects when we get to object oriented programming for Python, right? So for now it's just dealing with the basic concepts, right? But then basically what an object does is it allows you to access the methods within associated with so basically that object gives you methods based on what kind of an object that you have, right? So in this case it's an object that deals with a file, so it's an object of that file. So basically the methods you might be expecting is, okay, cool, there's a method for writing information to that file, there's a method for getting information from that file, and obviously since you open the file you also want to close that file, so there should be a method for closing the file, those type of methods, and you will see the methods that are there. And in terms of reading, there are different ways of reading a file as well, right? And then you will see the cool thing where we get to use the for loop. We've discussed about the for loop, right, and using it in terms of a file. So you see how we are beginning to start applying our concepts in real world problems, in real world applications, right? And then it's gonna get deep as we go further and further. So let's just look at the syntax for this open file. So this open function, not open file, so basically it returns an object, right? So you want to name that object, so you can use the variable rules or the variable naming rules to name your object, and then you're going to use an assignment operator as we discussed. Then you're going to use an open function, right? So this is a function that opens a file, and then you have two parameters. We discussed about functions, so in terms of understanding syntax, it shouldn't be hard for you to understand. If you're having difficulty, just pause the video and go back to the video we discussed about functions so that you can follow along. So it's an open function, right? And then inside you have two parameters. The first parameter deals with the file name, so you're going to name your file name. You're going to provide the file name with the extension, because this function has to know which file it's dealing with, because you need to have access to that file. So you have to create an object associated with that file, and then you're going to have a mode, and then we're going to discuss about different modes just now. Cool. Cool. Yeah, let's just head over to just discuss straight forward the modes in which you can open your file with, right? So you can open a file in such a way that you just want to read information only. So you won't be able to write anything to that file. It will only read. If you try to write, you gonna get an error. And then you can have open your file in such a way that you can write. So if you can write, you definitely will be able to read as well, right? And then we get to see all those modes, right? So we have these three modes for this appending, right? So what this one does is, if you're creating a file and you want to add items to that file, right? So basically you're creating a file, or a file already exists. So this one works better if a file is existing and you want to add contents to the content that already exists. Maybe you have a list of students and you want to update it because there's a new student in the class. You add that student in that list without affecting the content that already existed, right? That's what append does. It adds. But then if a file doesn't exist, it creates a file and then it adds items to it. Write is the same thing. You're going to create a file, right? But then what this one does, every time you open a file and then you are using it or using a write mode, it's going to override. If the file already exists, it's going to override that file, meaning that it overrides the contents. If you're just adding only those two students, your file is going to be overridden with only the two students, right? Which is not something that you want, unless if you're dealing with a program that works only with the data that you want to save, not the previous data, then you can do that, right? Or you can have that data stored in such a way that you just add the students in the list and store everything, including the two new students, using a write. Then that way it's just going to override and write the students as it is. And then we have a read. This is just when you want to open your file and just read the contents of a file only, right? That's the mode. And then from there, it's always a good idea to close your file. So you're going to use a file object and close the file, right? I didn't show you how to write to a file, but we're going to show you just now. I thought I had you in my slides, but I didn't. But it shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be something you get to worry about, because we always apply what we do. So without any further ado, let's go to our terminal. There we go. We always have two tabs. Just as I said, you can use any editor online as well. But then if you are using an online one, I don't know how it truly works in terms of the file, but I say it's better to just use terminal as long as you have Python 3 installed. If not, then just make sure you try to get videos to install Python. If not, then just let me know that you want help with installing, then I will help you install. Cool. So I am just gonna start by creating a directory, and then this is just gonna be files, right? Now let's make sure that we're gonna compile as well. We are in the same directory, and if we check, we have no files at all. So Vim, then I'm just gonna call this read or py, right? So cool. So we're gonna be reading a file, right? So what I'm going to do first is create a file, right? After creating a file, and then we're going to read the file, read the contents of the file, right? Cool. So let's start. So we have a file. You can just call it anything, so you give it any name, right? So I'm just going to call it file, and then I'm gonna use an open function. I hope that's not a keyword because it's showing me that it's a keyword. Cool. And then I want to create a file called murex.txt. It's a text file, right? As I mentioned, we're gonna be dealing with just a text file, and then I want to write, right? So I'm gonna use that mode. This is me writing to a file, and then I'm just gonna create a for loop, and then I add numbers to that file, right? For number in, and then I use the file object as is, which is one of the things I showed you that I'm gonna be so basically this has access to that file. So now I want to be adding items to that file using the file object, right? And then from there, so basically I'm gonna say file dot write, and then I'm just gonna add a number there, which I have to convert to a string because it's a string. So it's a text file, so it includes strings, but we'll see what happens if we just try to write the number as it is, right? So if I come here and I do this, I have my file, right? So I'm gonna execute the file using Python 3 and then read, and then it says unsupported operation for number in file not readable, right? And then here's why. See, so the file doesn't have any contents at the moment. It doesn't exist, right? Did it write? It did write, but then if we check the file, it has nothing. If we try to put something now, no, let's not rush to that. Let's just not even edit anything, right? So basically our file doesn't have anything, right? So we have to first write before we actually add items to that file, right? And then the way we're going to do that is this. So for instead of using a file there, we're going to use range, and then we just want to write 5 items or 5 numbers to that file, and let's try to execute and see. So it executed, right? So if I open my file, I've written 0 1 2 3 4, right? And it's a string, right? That's what I executed, right? So it added those numbers, but then now this is not how you want to write contents into a file. You wanna, so if you had a name, you want to write the first name or the first student on the first line, then go to the next line and the next line, right? So which it's something that you're gonna actually see, especially when you read that file, right? Because when you're in the next line, you're gonna have that end line when you read that file. You want to get rid of that end line because you don't want to use a string with that end line, unless if you wish to use the string with that end line, but it's always better to not use that end line. That end line is just for the purpose of the file, right? So in this case, you add, this is what you're adding, right? You're adding this file, and want to add this, right? I want to move to the next line before I add the new item, right? So I can just do that either on the same line or go to the next line and write the end line, but it's better to just do it there since you already know this, and then that's it. So basically what you're doing, you adding number on the first line, and then go to the next line, add the number that you have, next line, and so on and so on. So if we execute, let me quit this without editing. I don't want to edit the file. I just want to read the file and show the content. There we go. And then we open the file. Now you see that we're writing files on each line. That's basically how you create a file, right? And then you add that on each line, right? That's basically how you can create a file there. You can even create a file that gets you the name or the information from the user, right? Using this. So we just go there and we use input. This we discussed in the very first video, and then it's student name, and then we go there, and I don't want to write to this file, and then we write, right? And then I'm gonna have the first name Murendra. Oh, let me just write my name properly. Murendra Rajitimba. There we go. Within code, that's where I'm studying. We have Java, this is Python, and Murex the coder. Hey, we can't forget about the YouTube, Murex the coder, right? That's the file. You've written the contents to the file. So if I was to open the file has been overridden. That's what I was explaining when I said that when you open a file and you use the write mode, it overrides the contents of that file. Now let's demonstrate. Now if we say okay, let's just say that now this is the list of the students that we have, and we want to add 2 more students, right? Or we want to add whatever students that we want to add. So let's just keep it 2 or 3 students. So I'm going to close this file without saving, and I'm going to go to my code. Cool. And then instead of using write, instead of using write, I'm gonna use append, and then I want to add only 2 students, right? So I just want to add 2, right? And then I'm just gonna say new student name, and then I write, and then I'm gonna clear this, and then we write, right? I'm gonna add 2 new students, right? So we have, okay, since this is Saturday and I just released my JavaScript and HTML, so that's the new languages we're just gonna add. HTML, then Java script. There we go. And then I open my file, and then you see that I have added 2 more items from my existing file. Does that make sense? Does it make sense? So that's how the 2 modes work in terms of writing and creating a file. And since we've already created the file, and I am gonna delete the code for writing a file, we don't want to write a file anymore, we just want to read the file now. Cool. There we go. So now what I'm gonna do now is I am gonna I'm gonna read the file, right? So the first thing is create the object. You can even name this anything, right? It's just the name of your file, and then I open. So when I open, that's the name of the file. It's murex.txt, and then it's read, right? That's the read mode, right? And then from there I just want to read the contents of that file. So initially, if you checked, right, okay, you have line in file. That's what we had before, but it didn't work because the file was empty, right? So now if we read line, and let me close this without saving. So there we go, right? You read, but then because you're storing with that end line, it's gonna have that line there, line there, line there. And to properly see that, you can just use a list. You're gonna have a list, right? So this is A, right? And then what you're gonna do there is just it's A dot append, and then it's line, right? And then after the for loop, you wanna print that list. There we go. And clear. And then there we go. So you see, this is what it gets from the first item, right? And then when you're printing, your Python is gonna print that and go to the next line. Print that, then go to the next line. Print that, then go to the next line. That's why you will see all those lines afterwards, right? That's basically what you have there. And that's basically how you read a file, and that's how you write a file. I do hope that this was helpful, and you did manage to understand file handling. I mentioned something about reading and writing a file to a dictionary, right? So in the next tutorial, we'll discuss the methods that allows us to play around with the contents that we get, right? You want to split the contents in such a way that, okay, cool, you have this file or you have this information that is associated with this. So you want to have two items, and then you assign one as a key and the other one as a value. So the key is basically what you want. So basically, if you have a file that has a student name and the marks, you want the name to be the key and the mark to be the value, right? If you want the mark of the student, you provide the name and you get the value, or you get the marks that they got. Yeah, that's basically it, and I shall see you guys in the next tutorial.